Happy Wednesday. It's let's talk coronavirus time. I have a unicorn today.
I was going to say, you got it. I mean, talk about, in this case, it's not an elephant in the room. We can't ignore the gigantic horned horse in the room.
I know, folks, I decided that today, in honor of Giving Day, be kind, in honor of Giving Day, I would deviate from my normal approach to Zoom background artistry in favor of my favorite and my child's favorite animal. She calls them like unicorns. And so welcome to Let's Talk Coronavirus. I'm Rachel Bergstrom. I teach biology at Beloit College, and I'm also a faculty affiliate of our Health and Society program.
And I'm Ron Watson. I am a professor, I think, if the words will actually come out, in our political science department, as well as the co-chair of our Health and Society program.
And today we have three guests. This is very exciting for us. And so we'll go through and we'll start with you, Bob. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm Bob Elder, and I teach in the economics department at Beloit College. I'm happy to be here today and look forward to our conversation.
Excellent. And Zip?
Hi, I'm Zip Fan. I'm also a faculty member in the economics department at Beloit College. Happy to be here today too.
And our final guest.
Hi, I'm Lisa Walsh. I teach in the Greek, Latin, and Ancient Mediterranean Studies department at Beloit College, aka the GLAM department. I'm also happy to be here.
Excellent. Well, thank you all for joining us. We always start out with an acknowledgement that we're all humans. And in that, we'd like to just check in. How are you doing? What are you doing to keep yourself pandemic sane, or not, as it happens? Let's go ahead, Ron.
Oh, wow. I mean, keeping myself sane is it's not a gigantic challenge, because I'm like an indoor cat, right? So, but between my kids and doing classes and all that, I'm definitely pretty busy. And I think I've made the argument to folks. I think I'm busier now than I was before, which is interesting. I'm looking for some of that free time that people apparently have now.
Sorry. All right, Zip, go ahead.
Well, I'm feeling the same way. Teaching online apparently seems busier, and on top of that, I have to homeschool 2 kids. So, and my husband is also working full time, so it is difficult to keep up. However, I'm glad that I'm so busy, I don't have time to read the news. So. I don't check the news anymore. So.
There is a benefit to that.
Yes.
Bob, how about you? What's keeping you sane and or busy right now?
Well, I think my 3 classes, it's really amazing. I agree with Ron and Zip. It just fills up the whole day, every day, and it's amazing. Between the recording, some of my presentations I record, others I have live Zoom meetings, and then I've recently been giving exams and grading all of those, and it just fills up all day, every day. I guess it's good to be busy.
Yeah, there's some benefits to it, but yeah, it's kind of amazing how much the work is different and the same, and how it fills the space. So, Liesl, how about you?
I mean, I feel like my head would not be attached to my body if it were not like physically attached to my body. Like it would be in some other room in my house somewhere, and I would have just forgotten it and just not even know where it is right now, and just not care really. Let me see. Our house has we have 2 house guests who are coronavirus refugees from Brooklyn, New York, who drove out here on March 12th, I think, or 13th, and have been living with us for the last month and almost a week. So that's been an interesting living arrangement. and trying to teach my classes, but also feeling like it's, you know, I've totally gone into summer vacation mode because I don't really know how to work remote teaching into my daily schedule. And I feel like my students feel kind of the same way. With that said, I agree with Bob that, like, you know, there are moments of teaching where just having those like little face-to-face interactions with the students are really centering and motivating for me to just, like, I don't know, keep hanging in, keeping in touch with everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of feedback. There was a survey that was done on our campus to ask students about their experience, and one of the things that came back in the survey was maintaining connections is still important. And just as a plug, of course, that's what we do here at Beloit, and that's really the thing that we're so excited about is getting to know students, and I think that many alumni would agree that that's really the huge thing. So
yeah, and come hook or crook, we're going to figure it out, right?
Can I add something, which is that yes, it's been very busy, but it's, you know, teaching is always busy. But the one thing about teaching that continues to be the same for me, at least, are those, you know, very nice moments of, yes, my students are getting it. Yes, you know, like the teaching is pleasurable. For example, this morning I taught 2 classes, and one of them was on Asian economies, and I had 19 out of 21 students attending. We had class discussion, and it was as lively and active and, you know, participatory as ever. So that was very rewarding. And so I was thinking, COVID-19, you're not going to stop me from teaching.
That's right. Give it the smackdown, Zip. Give it the smackdown.
I think what's winning, what I've seen over the time. So, you know, that first week where we were online was like, again, I totally identify with what you were saying, Liesl, about your head not being attached, because none of my classes felt good. I felt like I had lost connection with everybody. And I still, you know, I still am mourning the loss of a regular connection with my students. But it's starting to come together just in time for the end of the semester.
But I mean,
full of comedy today, Rachel.
I know.
I think it's, you know, it's worth remembering that this is quite literally an unprecedented situation.
It is indeed.
For the entire globe right now. And it's not, you know, we're not innately born with the coping skills to deal with this. And so trying to act as though we can just keep going as normal, or as though, you know, 30% of our brains isn't at all times concerned about coronavirus, to me is like, that's a fool's errand.
Right. Well, and I think that it's been helpful for me to remember that, you know, I spend half of my day chasing my toddler. And now that over the past week or so, well, week and a half, I've finally gotten in my mind that that's what I do. And the fact that I cannot I will not put the brain space to the work that I can't get done when I'm focused on the toddler. So this morning we baked two batches of cookies. So that's, and I've eaten probably a whole batch. No, I haven't eaten a whole batch, but you know, cookies taste good right now.
They do. Comfort food is where it's at right this moment. Yes.
Yeah.
So let's get started talking a little bit more about how you are each processing this this pandemic as people who know a lot about a very narrow area of stuff. So I think that maybe one of the first places to start would be to say one of the biggest changes that we've seen in coronavirus news over the past week or so is the push to reopen the economy. And I'm just going to drop that there and hear what the economists have to say.
Well, I'll jump in. I read a really nice piece by a couple of economists at Yale. They were saying that the safe reopening of the economy depends on the ability to safely relax social distancing. To safely relax social distancing, they also emphasize that these government spending stimulus packages really should focus the spending on attacking COVID-19. This is not the time for government spending on roads and bridges. So they advocated, first of all, to safely relax social distancing, more comprehensive testing, and government spending to support comprehensive testing for everybody in the workplace so that they can safely work side by side. So in this most recent package that just got passed, I think a couple of days ago, I think it's $448 billion. About a third of that was on testing. So that's in a good direction. They also advocate spending to provide everybody in the workplace with masks. And again, this is towards the ability to safely relax social distancing. And then they advocate spending to support the development of vaccines. There again, as soon as we have that vaccine, you can safely relax social distancing as well. So the great thing about what these guys were saying is that, and let me cite them, Stephen Barry and Zach Cooper. They work at the Tobin Policy Center at Yale. The great thing that what they were saying is that they were placing safety first. They're talking about safely reopening the economy and how that's a function of safely relaxing social distancing. And they cited a interesting metaphor from a guy named Ivan Werner at MIT, in which apparently Ivan Werner said that if there was an asteroid headed towards the planet Earth, all of the government spending should be devoted to attacking that asteroid. Okay, not roads and bridges. So again, facing COVID-19, all of the spending should go to attacking COVID-19 and addressing the kind of the source of the problems in the economy, where they are. To safely reopen the economy, we need to safely relax social distancing, testing, masks, and the vaccine. That was kind of the best thing that I've read about the economics of safely reopening the economy. So I just wanted to share that with everybody.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, this seems on some level like intuitive, but clearly there are some other issues at play here, including the sort of ongoing politicization of what's going on. But one of the things that's been on my mind has been when Liesl, when you said that you were interested in talking about this, right? Was trying to think about what sort of perspective, especially for someone who spent so much time studying and doing research about the ancient world. I mean, clearly plagues and these sorts of, seemingly society-ending disasters aren't new. So from your perspective, how did you see this? How do you see this play out in your research and in the ancient world? And more importantly, how did like ordinary people, to the best of your knowledge back then, think about or try to protect themselves during these sorts of outbreaks?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the short answer is a lot of people died, right? And the people who wrote the histories are the people who survived, and to listen to their stories. I mean, if we believe what some of the historians have to say, in certain instances, there was kind of a complete breakdown of society during severe outbreaks of a contagious epidemic. So from my perspective, I'm super happy that like people are still generally obeying the laws. Like there's not mass murder going on. Like people aren't like leaving dead bodies in churches. Like that's some like groundbreaking progressiveness compared to what was going on in antiquity.
Sure.
In terms of protecting oneself, I mean, isolation and like geographic isolation was sort of the primary means that people would use to protect themselves and protect their families from exposing themselves to a contagion. And that's even before they understood what we do about like germs and contagiousness of diseases. Even when they attributed diseases to like bad air, they sort of knew enough, like, okay, well, let's get away from the bad air, which means getting out of town or sending your family members out of town. And hopefully, you hadn't already caught it by then. I think one of the reasons why this coronavirus is so pernicious is because that doesn't necessarily work as a way of preventing contagious people from getting from one population to another, because there's so much asymptomatic transmission. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's also, I mean, one of the huge issues is just all of the movement of people, right?
Yeah.
The combination of that asymptomatic carriers, and the international travel. And I think it's been interesting to follow the way that the administration is trying to limit international travel in some, I think, extremely problematic ways. To try and decrease. So the most recent thing has been to decrease all immigration, all green card applications are going to be rejected for the next 60 days, which is when one of the things that just kind of blew my mind about that was that even somebody in the White House or one of the advisors said, with all of the decrease in the travel that we've already got, this isn't really going to make a difference.
No.
And Zip, you're really shaking your head there. What does that make you think of?
Well, actually, I would like to go back to an earlier point about
Sure.
reopening the economy. I think a lot of people are under the misperception that there is a separation of an economic issue and a public health issue.
Right.
There isn't, okay? This shock to the economy is caused by a shock to the labor supply. People are getting sick, or they are afraid of getting sick, so they cannot participate in the labor market anymore. So let me make it very clear that economic recovery can only happen after the public health issue has been resolved.
Right on.
So it's not a trade-off. It's not like you either sacrifice public health for the economy or vice versa. No, the two of them are together. So you have to solve the public health problem first, then you can solve the supply shock to the economy. And so, yes, I'm all about, waiting for it to be completely over. Only when we feel very safe should we reopen the economy, because if not, we just have another wave and things, the economic impact then will be even worse. Okay?
Then my question then is, what is the government's role in, I'm comparing this a lot to like the 2008 recession. And, when the government first announced that they were going to be allowing sort of forbearances on mortgage payments, and some cities are allowing like they're making it illegal to evict somebody during this time. I was like, gosh, it seems like they really finally like figured out that maybe if people are behind on their mortgage payments, it's not like because of their individual failings in their finances. Maybe it's because like everybody's living paycheck to paycheck. And so thank goodness they finally like realized that and are giving people a break. But so what is the role of government, do you think, in that?
Well, so I do have an answer to that. The 2008 and 9 Great Recession, that crisis was very different from what we see now.
Yes.
What we had then was a demand shock, right? Which started with the housing crisis and then banking and financial crisis. It was a demand shock. A demand shock is relatively easy to fix from a policy perspective. You just need to stimulate demand. So if private demand is falling, you have the government pumping demand into the economy, and that is supposed to fix it. Now, what we have now is a supply shock. So any kind of demand fix, such as a fiscal stimulus by the government, isn't going to fix the supply shock. And the supply shock is due to the public health crisis. The only thing that fixes it is when you solve the public health crisis. Okay?
Yeah.
However, it doesn't, even though the fiscal stimulus is not supposed to solve a supply shock problem, what it does is to keep things afloat. Yes. Because when the public health crisis is over, the economy is supposed to recover. But how fast it can recover then depends on, are there still jobs? You know, when people can go back to work again, will the jobs still be there for them? Will the firms still be there for them? If the firms go bankrupt during this period of public health crisis, then later on, there's nothing for people to go back to. It costs time and money to restart firms and to restart jobs. So the government's job, or the government fiscal stimulus, what it really does is, well, it certainly is the pain, the economic pain that people are having to go through now, but also to keep things afloat so that once the virus is over, the economy can bounce back fast, so that it doesn't, the recession doesn't turn into a depression that takes forever to recover.
Yeah.
So Zip, there's actually a question from Facebook that's related to this too. In terms of the stimulus. John Urish is wondering if you or Bob know how the banks are being compensated for processing these funds. Is it by the loan or the aggregate amount of money? And how is this then going to, do you think, impact that transition back from the pandemic itself?
Yeah, especially since so many of the initial funds were, and now it is certainly controversial, right? We're sort of claimed by much larger corporate entities than the small businesses they were meant to be benefiting. So yeah, carry on, please.
Yeah, John uses the acronym PPP, and that stands for Paycheck Protection Program.
Okay.
And that originated in the CARES Act, which was passed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And this more recent stimulus a couple of days ago had more funds for the Paycheck Protection Program as well. And that it kind of addresses what Ziep was talking about too. It's designed to keep small businesses afloat. So a small business can get a loan of up to $10 million and just use it to keep paying their workers, even though they might not be coming into work. And actually doing work for the firm and sustain them. I think the original one was till June, and I think this new version of it extends that further. And so the whole idea is to keep people employed, keep them earning paychecks, and then by midsummer, late summer, when it may be possible to more safely relax social distancing, the firms are still afloat, like Ziep said, and you don't have to restart from scratch. More difficult.
Yeah. I mean, what's fascinating to me is that this it's great, right? The idea of keeping payroll going, right, for people who are otherwise confined and can't come to work, but it sort of papers over what I see as like a fundamental flaw, and perhaps like Rachel, you and Ron have already talked about this in this conversation, which is that if a person gets laid off or they lose their job or the firm goes under, they've lost their health insurance. Right. And so how are they even going to get treated? And how much anxiety is there going to be in the general populace about getting treatment for anything, much less for coronavirus, even though, people might promise like, oh, it'll be covered. Who's to say, right?
Well, that ties in actually to another question that I had. But before I jump into it, I want to see do we know much about how banks are being compensated for processing these triple P loans? I will say I personally don't know much about it.
So I heard this morning on NPR that it's a percentage. And so it's for smaller loans, it's a higher percentage because it's the idea that the bank needs to recoup their fees. And for larger loans, it's a smaller percentage, and the percent range that I was hearing was 1% to 5%.
Okay.
And so I know that the other thing that I heard was Wells Fargo has graciously agreed to donate all of their profits to charity, but that's part of the Wells Fargo deal that they have to do anyways for their previous malfeasance. And
so thank you for saying that.
so it's not that they're doing it just because they're like, oh, this would be great. I mean, it looks like great PR, just from the heart, you know? So, but there hadn't as of 6:30 this morning when I heard it on the news, there hadn't been anything coming out from like JP Morgan and the like. Just knowing though that it is a percentage at this point.
So the question that I had, and this really ties into this euphemism that's been bothering me. And that's this idea of essential workers. Right? And on some level, it troubles me deeply because when I think about language and how people use language, when you say something in a particular context, these people are essential, right? So in this context, they're essential. These are many of the same people going out literally every single day, either risking their lives because they have to, in almost every case because they have to, or because they are part of some industry that did not shut down or was not considered itself non-essential, right? And so their employer isn't really giving them a break to not show up. At this point, I've spoken to probably about 5 or 6 people, including some relatives who fall into this category. Mm-hmm. And so one of my questions that I thought I'd throw out there for folks to see what you think is, what do we think is going to really happen when this is over? Are we going to see that these folks actually are essential, or are we going to see some attempt to then lay those same crucial essential workers off? And what do we think about that?
Well, I mean, historically speaking, it is during sort of mass epidemics and high mortality rates, or at least the high fear of mortality, that has led to significant changes in the way that workers are demanding wages or demanding particular freedoms. Mm-hmm. And so, at least it is attributed to the Black Plague, the end of feudalism in Europe, that all of a sudden it was really dangerous to go plow the fields every day, and yet it needed to be done. And so the workers were in a bargaining position where they could say, look, dude, you got to pay me more money if you want me to do this because it's dangerous. Mm-hmm. And I guess I don't see the workers right now unionizing or making attempts, perhaps with the exception of nurses, to really bond together as like an essential workers class, which might then gain some bargaining power.
When I wonder about, I mean, there's the essential workers in the healthcare industry, which is one thing, and then I think about the essential workers who are doing shopping. Yeah. For people, right? And there's different. I think that these essential workers fall into different categories in a lot of people's minds, in various different ways that really are going to shape that.
Yeah.
Well, I will offer an economic perspective to this. I think this is actually a principles of economics question. You know, why is diamond expensive and water is not? And water is essential, but diamond is not essential. So there's a difference between being essential and being scarce. So when you look at the market, the price of things are determined not by how essential it is, but how scarce it is, or relative scarcity. Okay? So you need to distinguish between the two. Now, in a context where the demand for labor for these types of workers is going up, now in theory, you're looking at a relative increase in scarcity. So the market price for them should go up. But then that is, you assume the market, is extremely dynamic and you can just change wage like that. instantly. You know, like when I draw the demand and supply on the board, it's like, oh, wage just go up, like, you know, just like that. Now, in reality, you know, things are like, we have something called rigidity in the market, right? I mean, things are stuck there, and then it's not as dynamic. If the situation lasts long, then you should see wages going up for these workers, because they are, you know, the value of their labor is increased, they are in higher demand, they are in, you know, relative scarcity. So in theory, their wages should go up. But, you know, this is a short run phenomenon that is happening, or what we hope it is going to be.
I was going to say, wow, so you're really optimistic there, right?
So in the short run, we also know in economics that prices and wages don't change that fast in the short run. There's rigidity. So that's the economic perspective into this.
But it also assumes... No, go for it, Rachel.
Okay, I was going to ask if that's kind of, if there's a concept of hazard pay. Is that kind of, is the idea behind that, it's a bonus on top of what your normal pay is, so that once the hazard is passed, it feels better to go back to the normal wages, versus raising wages just because of the demand or the scarcity, and then having to lower wages again after we've passed out of the crisis?
Well, I mean, the idea that jobs that are more, you know, dangerous, people should be paid higher. We do see that in the data. You know, people who have more dangerous jobs, they do get paid higher, you know, given that the same kind of skill and education that you require of the workers. But again, those adjustments have been built into the labor market in the long run. But given the time frame we are looking at here, I doubt that you will see significant changes in the wages.
Well, and I think there's so many people right now who, if you've been laid off, right, the American ethic, right, says, well, crap, I got to go get a job as quickly as I can, right? I got to start earning money again. And so I'm not sure that essential workers are going to be as scarce as they would need to be to justify a raise in their wages.
Yeah. And it's a big concern. Again, for me, my concern, I think, is largely about after the crisis, right? And obviously none of us know, but you know, my hope is that the sort of changes that we think could come from something like this, and especially the sort of solidarity among so-called essential workers, that may emerge, particularly those who would have been considered low-wage earners prior to the crisis, that'll emerge and maybe change some policy. And what I'm afraid is that we'll see something much more like what happened after World War II, right? So during the war, all the men are gone, so the women folks step in, and they're in the factories, and they're getting paid, and they're doing all this, and then the war ends, and the men come back, they're like, okay, women, y'all got to go now, right? That's my big concern. So anyway, just throwing that out there. Thank you all for your perspectives on that. Appreciate it.
So I want to just like turn the bus real quick, and I want to ask another question of Liesl specifically, as somebody who studies ancient stuff. How do you think about this pandemic in the context of this is kind of a long question, sorry, but
no, it's fine.
Antibiotics. We've had antibiotics since 1940s, right, with penicillin. And antibiotics were a real inflection point in our ability to treat diseases and to understand pathology and to really control infections. And since then, of course, it's exploded. We have antivirals. We have gone from 1980, when AIDS was a death sentence, to now manageable chronic condition, right? And so one of the things that has come up in my classes talking with students is, and just in conversations, is this feels like, I mean, like Ebola is one thing, but this feels like the first real time that the world has had to deal with a disease that we don't really know what to do with, right? I mean, it happened for HIV and AIDS, it happened for Ebola, and now it's happening again. And at the same time, we're also completely overwhelmed in our healthcare system, right? And so given this context, how do you use like historical experience and our historical record of medical treatments and how people dealt with situations like this, where it's kind of like, what do we do here? How do we use that to encourage people to not lose all hope? Like, what do you do with that from your perspective?
Yeah, no, it's great. That's one of the reasons, I mean, not that this is an enjoyable situation, but it is, from an ancient historian's perspective, it is interesting to watch a community try or to be part of a community, right, that is, it's almost trying to produce knowledge from scratch about this new disease that is moving through the population. And it was, I mean, it's been a comedy of errors on the part of, I'll say it, on the part of the WHO and the CDC and Anthony Fauci. Like, I love him to death, but as soon as, I think it was, because my brother and I have been like riffing on this like constantly for like, the last month and a week. But it was in January 24th that there was a person-to-person transmission in Germany from a woman who had flown from China to Germany, went to a lab. She was asymptomatic at the time of transmission. And as soon as that happened, and I think it was published in The Lancet a few days later, as soon as that happened, I was like, holy crap, like this thing is going to be everywhere in 2 months, because the screening for fevers at airports is only going to catch some portion of the people. There's going to be tons of asymptomatic transmission. And, people are just not going to understand that it's like, it's already in the country. We need to be doing the testing. We need to be screening people who are asymptomatic. And that's, so watching that, I mean, it's been frustrating kind of like from the backs, so to put this in like, I guess, ancient perspective, one of the more interesting texts that we have from ancient Greece is this text called Epidemics, and it's written by one of the Hippocratic writers. And, my students were very perplexed by it when they first encountered it. And we read a little bit more later in the semester, and it really rang true to what's going on now, in that in Epidemics, it seems like the author is like this traveling physician who just goes through cataloging people's illnesses and not necessarily intervening to do any treatment, nor is this person interested in like a diagnosis, but they are interested in documenting the course of the disease and the symptoms that are occurring at different points in time. And from case to case, right, they're not consistent in terms of making sure that they note they're not commenting on everybody's bowel movements, but like only the ones that are like abnormal, right?
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, well, but one of the symptoms of coronavirus is diarrhea, right? And like, who would have thunk that? Except that people started documenting it. And so that's been really interesting, is watching news come out about coronavirus or COVID, where people are doing this kind of like, on day 1, I felt fine. On day 4, I developed a fever. On day 7, it went away. On day 10, that's when I started having a cough. And like, maybe around day 9, I lost my sense of smell. And this interesting, just the way that we are producing knowledge about this new disease is very similar to the ways that ancient people were producing knowledge about their contagious diseases. And I think like when my students look at it, they're kind of like, we don't know what to do with this text, right? Because it seems like someone's just developing a data set but they're not drawing any conclusions. They're not seeing any patterns, but it looks like they're laying the groundwork for the next person to step in and look for patterns and start, then trying to do the whole diagnostics and then maybe treatment or something like that. And it's interesting watching that in process right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting parallel there, and I don't have the ancient history understanding, but I do I understand what you're saying about just the patterns of what I'm familiar with from HIV and AIDS, right? And
Yes.
from the Ebola outbreaks, and every single time there was another Ebola outbreak, there's a little bit more information and people have a little bit better handle on it. And what we've seen over time with the spillover after spillover after spillover of Ebola, that the fatality rate has gone down because people are actually adding to their knowledge and they're applying the knowledge
Right.
to the new case. And so I think that there are some really interesting things that come up with a novel coronavirus, because it's in the context of, we've had these other coronaviruses, and so we know a little bit about these other coronaviruses, but how do we use that to ask the next question, and how do we use
Exactly.
that to predict the next thing, right?
Yeah. But I think that also sort of problematizes what you said, Bob, about like funneling all the money we can into coronavirus research, or into developing, maybe developing a vaccine is easier at this point than taking the amount of, well, I guess it takes time, right? Like, it's not, throwing more money at it doesn't necessarily speed it up, because it requires a certain number of people to experience an infection and a certain number of tests to happen. And, that's just a process that can't be sped up. Like, illness doesn't go faster when people get paid more.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, the thing about vaccines is that they can have adverse side effects.
Yes.
And so you could come up with a new vaccine, but then you got to test it and wait to see if those adverse side effects develop. And you can't speed that up.
Yeah.
And there's issues of even just producing the vaccine. I mean, you can have a perfect vaccine with zero side effects, it's got 100%, it provides 100% immunity, but if you can't actually produce it at scale,
then how do you vaccinate a population?
Right.
I want to add something when you talk about, going back to the ancient and see how, they deal with epidemic. But actually, we don't have to go back that far.
No.
When you were talking about AIDS, you were talking about Ebola, but you actually also talk, there are two other important epidemics that happened recently, but people in the US aren't so aware of it, and that's SARS and H1N1.
Yeah.
Now, so I've had conversations with my students in my classes about, so which countries are doing a better job of being proactive and handling these cases. And a lot of students were having the hypothesis that, well, it has to do something with the political system. Maybe the authoritarian regimes are doing a better job. And I say that actually the countries that take this seriously from a very early stage are the ones who experience SARS and H1N1.
Yep.
With the exception of India, right?
It's serious, and so they take action right away. And those tend to be the countries that are proactive and tend to be ahead of the curve instead of behind it.
Yeah.
So I think we are building the knowledge about this. So when SARS happened, when H1N1 happened, they stayed epidemic. They did not turn into pandemic. But then, it started to ring the alarm in some people that sooner or later we would get something that would turn into a pandemic, right? However, to be fair, I think that it is really not possible to convince most people who have never seen an epidemic in their life. The last time that developed countries in the West have experienced an epidemic, it was, the Spanish flu 100 years ago. So to be fair, I mean,
there were polio outbreaks where people did
in terms of a really bad one, right?
Yeah.
And so it's difficult to convince either the government or the people to understand that this is serious. Okay.
Yeah.
So I do hope at least one thing that we get out of this is after this, when we have future outbreak, we will take it serious from day one, right? We will not make this mistake again.
And not make any assumptions about how the disease works, right? I think that's the other issue, is that we came in with so many assumptions about, it's a coronavirus, therefore it's probably going to have X, Y, and Z symptoms. And, we've seen this in the mortality rates, and, people were not asking, what don't we know that we don't know?
Yeah. So I have another question, and obviously I think what you all are saying here is spot on, but I have another question too. again, since we do have economists and someone with a strong and deep historical perspective here, let's talk about policy. We've already talked about, and you all know I'm a public health guy, so right, all policy is health policy. And so we've already talked about the first key thing that needs to happen is policy needs to be directed towards sorting out the coronavirus, right? And getting that done first. But let's say that we are able to figure out that. What's the first step then, or the next step rather, after that, to sort of get people either sort of revitalize or re-energize the economy? If you were sort of asked to do it, like what would you do? What would be your first step after that?
Well, like I said earlier, the public, I mean, the government can undo the lockdown, they can lift it. But if the public does not believe that the danger is over, they will still stay home. I will still keep my kids at home, regardless of what the governor is saying.
Right. So there's got to be some, so you're saying there's got to be some move to restore public confidence.
Exactly.
Okay.
And unfortunately, in this country, there's not a lot of trust in, in the government's ability. So from the beginning, you need to maintain transparency. People need to believe the numbers when you say it. Okay, that if you say things are under control, it really is under control. I mean, Trump was saying that it was under control, but it was not, right? So now if he says it is under control, who's going to believe him? So I think it's going to be challenging when you already erode public trust, and public trust is so important in this situation. So I think opening the economy will be difficult. Just because the governor says let's open, it doesn't mean it will open, right? So I think the first step, even before you implement any policy, you need to regain public trust. But I don't know how the U.S. government is going to do that, with the person in charge.
I mean, it is problematic. I mean, this is something that folks around me have been saying too, right? Is that, this is why you don't play around with misinformation and that sort of thing. This is exactly why. Because when something happens, it's like we all know the story, right? The boy who cried wolf. Right. So now a real crisis is here, and no one can believe a thing that's coming out of the people who are supposed to know what's happening. Right. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. But if somehow, so you're saying then we've got to restore trust. What do we see then as the next move here? Because again, okay, so we've got a vaccine and people trust it. So, and we've done a campaign. What's next? What's the next step?
Well, we just listen to the public health, specialists when they say that, they are monitoring this and they have much better understanding of it than I think you and I do, right? So if we have public trust again, if we have trust in them again, we let them do their job. And when they say it is safe to reopen, and when the public believe it, then we reopen and people actually believe it and actually come out.
Okay. All right.
And then is it a return to normal, or do you think, do we continue to, or do we continue the stimulus approach to get firms back online doing the work that they were doing before, or do we start at the level of individuals? Where are we intervening?
I think
we can actually, so for those who don't know, I'm from Vietnam, and Vietnam is one of those countries that have very successfully controlled this epidemic. So it's going to be one of the first countries that reopen. Okay? So right now, every other country is in the crisis, right? Trying to handle this outbreak, trying to get to that peak, right? And then get over it. So it's close to, at least this wave of infection is over for Vietnam. It's had a total of 268 cases. And in the past week, there has been no new case. Okay?
Oh, wow.
The government is very tight in terms of controlling it. So the country may start reopening soon. So I think when it does, in a week, actually tonight, the lockdown is over.
Wow.
Students are going to go back soon. So it will be one of the first countries to reopen. So we can get to watch it, right? To see how they do it. And, it's a step-by-step thing, right? For example, I was reading how the Ministry of Education was giving guidelines for schools, how they're going to bring back students. These are the guidelines you have to follow. Initially, the students, we have to sit 1.5 meters apart, and then they have to wear masks. So the government has had the public trust, And now they're giving very clear guidance, step by step, of what you need to do, one step at a time. And then they keep monitoring the situation, and then gradually. And again, because the public has a trust, so they believe it, so they will follow the guidelines when the government reopens, one step at a time. So we can watch that to kind of learn from it. Yeah.
So we've got a question here from the chat that I think is a really good one, right? So, and this is obviously for everyone. So, do you think this pandemic will lead us to having better funding for preventive or preparedness measures? Funding for prevention often gets cut, and we know that is one thing that actually occurred that helped to make this crisis inevitable. Do you think this pandemic will change this pattern? So let's hear how hopeful you all are about this.
I think it depends who wins the presidential election in November.
Okay, you want to elaborate a little bit on that? What do you mean?
I think I feel like they're in the way that the Trump administration has attempted to spin their narrative of COVID into a narrative of success. I have a feeling that they're going to continue to try to do that no matter how bad it gets. And that part of their narrative of success is that the systems that they had in place when COVID broke out are exactly the systems that are needed, and that no more is necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's my pessimistic take on it.
Right on. Okay, Bob, go ahead. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Liesl that it matters what happens in the election. And I think probably, hopefully, what will evolve is a different way of thinking about national security. As going forward, as the government spends its money, maybe making everybody safe and secure is less about spending on military equipment and more about spending on prevention and health.
Okay. Yeah, I think it depends on who wins the election, because I feel like the Trump administration would just say, oh, well, we need to spend it on borders because that's our national security. That's our health prevention right there.
I think that getting to Zip's point about to people believing about the importance of preparation, and we have a tragic case study of that in vaccinations, and our ability to control measles is like the anti-vaxxer movement is a product of the success of vaccinations, right? And so to look at preparedness for future epidemics, if we are prepared, we won't be as significantly impacted, at which point then the question is, why are we spending all this money on preparedness? Why are we doing all this work for preparedness? Because we haven't had a problem. I think that that's something that we're going to be looking at over the next few months, especially when we start to think about this idea of we've spent this time social distancing. It's had an impact. It's hard for us to perfectly quantify that impact because we don't know what would have happened if we hadn't. And to say that the outcome is that not as many people died as we predicted. So apparently that's all we needed to do. It's difficult to get to the conclusion there that we need to continue to spend the money on preparedness. But the fact of the matter is that this is not the last time that we're going to be experiencing something like this. This is the way that we are interacting with the world, the way that we interact with one another in populations, the way that we interact with animals. This spillover event is going to happen over and over and over again. And we need to be prepared for it in a different way than we might have thought before.
Zip, you had something you wanted to bring into this. Go ahead.
So I can draw the parallel to financial crisis. So I teach about financial crisis, and the thing so economists know how financial crises happen, and we know what needs to be done to prevent it. So how is it that it keeps happening? Well, the way I explain it is we have short-term memory. The last time it happened, and then within a year or two, we forget how bad it could get. And then we kind of, forget that we need to be preventing it. And then we let it slip again, and we allow the economy to overheat and boom too much again. And then the crisis happen again. So yes, it depends on what the next administration is going to be. But then a lot of it is also our human nature.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so immediately after the pandemic, you will see, you know, more funding into pandemic prevention. But unfortunately, after a few years, we will start forgetting it. We will start questioning, why are we doing all this prevention, you know, if nothing is happening, right? But so we will forget. So just like how financial crises keep happening again, I'm not very optimistic here. So I think we will forget, and we will forget to prevent again.
This is why we need historians, people.
Because I think, I mean, well, I was just having a conversation with my students today, because we were reading this Marxist critique of the contemporary healthcare system, and then trying to think about ancient medicine and the economics of ancient medicine, and like what is it in the ancient medical texts that we can dig out that actually talks about class, or talks about like labor, or how people are being compensated, how much time they're spending out of work, what's happening to them. And it occurred to us, right, that there is no sort of like equivalent government intervention in Greco-Roman antiquity on a large scale in the way that we have large scale government intervention. And in the absence of that, oh God, am I going to sound like a conservative person? In the absence of that, maybe not because there's an absence of that, but in the absence of that, there's perhaps more community responsibility that people feel towards one another, partly because there's an interdependence in a locality, right? So there's less large scale travel, the way that we have large scale travel. And if your neighbor is sick and he can't plow his field, that means that you don't get vegetables in the fall. And so maybe you're going to get off your butt and plow his field for him because you want the vegetables in the fall, right? And maybe that's a favor that he does for you if and when you or your family get sick. And right now, I feel like American culture doesn't have very much sense of volunteerism in terms of other people's basic needs. Nor are people really willing to feel a sense of personal responsibility for the health and well-being of a larger population than themselves. And I think that's part of the root of the anti-vaxxer issue, and also the people who are protesting the stay-in-place orders.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long.
No, not at all. I mean, this is part of a conversation that I was having with some students today too, is, you know, we often forget that there are a number of things at play, right? First of all, American federalism is its own sort of distinct thing, right? Where we have these abnormally strong subnational units, right, that we call states. And they have been sort of gifted with, through tradition, primarily through tradition, if not through the Constitution, this idea that they are the ones who are responsible for the public health, right? And so there's some hope for me that at the national level, I think we will see the short-term solution that all of you are talking about, right? You know, in the short term, oh yeah, we got to put money back into prevention. And then of course, people will forget. And when I say people, I mean, I think successive administrations, if we're successful and there isn't an outbreak, then every success, and this is the problem with public health all the time, right?
Yep.
Public health is wallpaper. If everything goes well, nothing happens. Right. And it's not sexy enough for most of us, right? To keep our attention. But at any rate, I think that there will be some there. I think that you'll see most of the action though being done at the state level. That those states, I mean, New York will remember. New York will be ready. California, I think, will be ready. When we see the way that California, for example, reacted to the measles outbreak, right? They moved immediately or more or less immediately, to cover up one of the sort of holes that they had that allowed people to be exempt from vaccinations, right? And so I think that you'll see some states, the states that have taken this the most seriously this time around, they'll be ready, and they'll be ready to lead next time. But I also think it's important to remember too that, you know, the United States, when we talk about our inability to coalesce, right, as a nation, because you're spot on. I mean, I think there's plenty of data to support what you've said about people caring really only about what's in their own backyard, and the people who are closest to them. I think we have to remember, you know, this is a country that is very, very young still. We haven't coalesced. actually, in fact,
Right.
as people. I mean, we still are dealing with, oh, you're a different color than me. And I don't know what that means. And we're still dealing with that, versus countries that have, put those kinds of issues to bed, in some cases, thousands of years ago. And so in that sense, I think that it's going to take some time for the US to finally develop that communal sense that'll enable things to happen that need to happen to prevent these sorts of epidemics from being utter disasters at the national level. But the state level, I think you can bank on the governors of at least about 10 states taking this really seriously.
Social unity, I think that's the one you're looking for. The
Yes,
US
absolutely.
does not have the social unity it takes in order to deal with something like this.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's 100% the case, right? There's a lack of social unity, a lack of social solidarity, and there are reasons for that are both sensible given the history of the country, but are also clearly hindrances at this point, and especially when something like this happens, right? Not to mention having the right sort of leadership is key, and information and transparency are all key too. And this is part of it, right?
I think that this is, so we're going to wrap it up, but I think that this is a really good example of the complexity of human health, right? And the interconnectedness, and how health cannot be separated from any of the other parts of our society, nor can society be separated from the health of its individuals. And so I think we need to learn something from this, and we need to learn something that's indoors from it. And we've got stuff to do towards that end.
So now staying at home is what we need to do.
Stay at home, people. Wash your damn hands.
Wash your hands, stay home, kick back and watch some Netflix, order some food. Yeah, make it happen.
And just because you don't have symptoms does not mean you're not contagious.
That's exactly right.
So on that note, as we wrap up, I'd like to hear from everybody something that you're looking forward to for the next week, personal, professional, class-wise, cat-wise, Liesl? I mean, saw your kitty there. What are you looking
Oh,
for?
God. Let me see. I'm transplanting. I've been growing some seedlings on a windowsill of milkweed and butterfly weed, because I want to build a nice little butterfly garden in my front yard. And I'm looking forward to transplanting those into my front yard.
Hooray!
And also committing plant genocide against some of the invasive species in my yard.
Oh, ouch.
Well, we wish you the best on that.
It's a weird kind of pleasure.
Yeah. Bob, what are you looking forward to this week?
Well, the largest blip on my radar screen is all these exams that I'm grading. And I think that by Monday, I should be finished, hopefully, in all 3 of my classes with all the grading. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
We'll be rooting for you, Bob. We're rooting for you. We're all
feel that
Thanks.
deeply. Zip, what are you looking forward to?
Well, as the weather gets better and warm up, I'm looking forward to camping in the backyard with my kids.
Oh, delightful.
And fire.
I've never been camping. I got to do this.
Backyard camping's the way to start, Ron.
I think that sounds about right.
Yep. What are you looking forward to, Ron?
Oh my gosh. I think I'm going to try to search out and find a couple of new recipes. So, and some of you know, I love cooking and I love making cocktails. So I'm going to try to find something that allows me to cook with chocolate. I want to figure that out, right? And I'm not sure. I tried chocolate cocktails in the past and I didn't care for them, and maybe I was just doing it wrong. So we'll either do that or do some new decadent chocolate dish. We'll figure it out.
I just recommended one to you, chicken mole.
Yeah, yes, that's what I need to do, because I love chicken mole. Thank you. What would I do without you? I don't know. I live in a chocolate-free food world.
Right. Well, and I'm looking forward to good weather, and I'm looking forward to being able to think about something other than the exams that I'm grading. So, yeah. So we have a suggestion from Facebook that we should, at one point, have a quarantine party for our COVID-19 talk about.
Well, I mean, I'm headed to a cocktail hour with the critical identity studies folks, and my nice little beverage has just been sitting here waiting for me.
Nice.
On the windowsill.
Nice.
It's called the Mother-in-Law. It's a little bit overbearing, but it means well.
And on that note, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for the questions. We'll be back again next week. Next week we have our first non-Beloit guest, Brian Alexander, who is a futurist who thinks about issues around higher education, is going to come and talk. We're also going to welcome back our first repeat guest, Dr. Eric Boynton, the provost of the college. Last time we had him come and talk as a philosopher. This time we're going to have him come and talk as provost of the college, in light of something that many of you might have heard about, the Beloit Action Plan and our move to mods in the fall, and all of the exciting things that are happening with that. So that'll be next week at 4 o'clock on Facebook. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful evening.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, our guests, for joining us.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in.